Daniel Harper almost kept walking. The afternoon air in Seattle was cool, carrying the smell of rain that never fully left the city. He had just finished a college counseling meeting and decided to grab coffee before heading home. The cafe near Pine Street was busy, its windows glowing warmly against the gray sky. People laughed inside, cups clinked, and soft music floated through the glass. Nothing about the moment felt unusual until Daniel noticed a familiar black sedan parked along the curb. It was his father's car. Daniel slowed. His father, Michael Harper, should have been at work across town. Michael rarely left the office early, and he never mentioned meetings near this part of the city. Daniel told himself it was probably nothing. Maybe a client meeting, maybe a quick stop. Still, curiosity pulled him closer. He glanced through the window and froze. Michael sat at a corner table, leaning slightly forward. Across from him sat a woman Daniel had never seen before. She looked to be in her early 40s with soft brown hair and calm eyes that seemed fully focused on Michael. They were smiling in a quiet, comfortable way that felt personal, too personal. Daniel watched as his father laughed softly, a laugh Daniel hadn't heard at home in a long time. Then Michael reached across the table and gently touched the woman's hand. The world seemed to pause. Daniel stepped back quickly, his heart beat loud in his ears. His first thought was denial. There had to be an explanation. His father wasn't that kind of man. Michael Harper was steady, responsible, predictable. The man who coached Little League games, fixed broken shelves, and always kissed Laura goodbye before leaving for work. Daniel turned away from the window, suddenly unsure of what to do with himself. The sounds of the street felt distant. Cars passed, people talked, but everything blurred together. He walked without direction for nearly 20 minutes before realizing he was heading home. Michael Harper believed he had built a good life. For 22 years, he had followed the same quiet rhythm: work hard, provide stability, love his family. There were birthday traditions, Sunday dinners, and movie nights that once felt sacred, but somewhere along the way, life became mechanical. Laura worked long hours as a nurse. Michael managed a demanding job at an insurance firm. Evenings turned into exhausted conversations about bills, errands, and schedules. Michael told himself this was normal. Marriage matured, passion softened. People grew comfortable, yet comfort slowly became loneliness. He never planned to look outside his marriage. The idea once felt impossible. But loneliness rarely announces itself loudly. It grows quietly, filling empty spaces until something unexpected breaks through. Michael had stopped in to escape the weather. While browsing, he reached for a novel at the same time as another hand. He pulled back politely, apologizing, and met Claire Bennett. They joked about. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but Michael left feeling strangely lighter. The next week he returned, telling himself he needed another book. Claire recognized him instantly. They talked again, then again. Some coffee followed. Michael convinced himself it was harmless. Claire knew he was married. She never crossed boundaries openly. She listened when he spoke about work stress and aging parents and the strange feeling of becoming invisible in middle age. With her, he felt interesting again, seen, alive. He didn't notice when emotional comfort turned into emotional dependence. Daniel reached home that evening feeling hollow. The house looked exactly the same: white porch railing, trimmed lawn. His mother's car was already there. Inside, Laura stood at the stove cooking pasta, humming softly to music playing from her phone. She smiled when Daniel entered. "How was the meeting?" She talked about her shift at the hospital, about a difficult patient who finally improved. Daniel nodded, but his mind replayed the cafe. A few minutes later, Michael walked through the front door carrying groceries. "Hey, buddy," he said casually to Daniel. "You beat me home." Daniel stared at him, searching for signs of guilt. But Michael looked relaxed, ordinary, exactly like always. The normal conversation felt unbearable. Dinner passed with small talk. Michael asked about college plans. He kept waiting for his father to reveal something, to confess without being asked. But nothing happened. After dinner, Laura fell asleep on the couch while watching television. Michael quietly placed a blanket over her shoulders. Daniel watched from the hallway, confusion growing deeper. How could someone who cared like that also betray her? The question stayed with him long into the night. Michael lay awake later, staring at the ceiling beside Laura. He felt divided between two versions of himself. He told himself he wasn't hurting anyone. Nothing physical had happened beyond small touches, lingering conversations, shared laughter. But deep down, he knew emotional lines had already been crossed. He promised himself he would slow things down. Yet the next day, when Claire texted asking if he wanted coffee, he said yes without hesitation. Daniel, meanwhile, couldn't stop thinking about what he saw. He wrestled with whether to tell his mother. The thought made him sick. Revealing the truth would shatter her. Staying silent felt like betrayal. For 2 days he carried the secret, alone, growing angrier each hour. Finally, he decided he needed certainty, so he followed his father. After school, Daniel waited near Michael's office building. When Michael exited and walked toward the bookstore district instead of the parking garage, Daniel's stomach tightened. He followed from a distance. Michael entered the bookstore. Through the window, Daniel saw Claire greet him with a smile that looked familiar and intimate. She handed him coffee before he even ordered. They spoke closely, laughing quietly. There was no misunderstanding now. This was real. Daniel pushed the door open. A small bell rang overhead. Michael turned and froze. Shock spread across his face as their eyes met. "Dad," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Claire looked confused, sensing tension instantly. Michael stood slowly. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" Daniel ignored the question. His gaze stayed fixed on his father. "I saw you at the cafe," he said quietly. "Mom deserves better." The words landed heavily. Claire's expression changed, realization dawning. She stepped back slightly, giving space without speaking. Michael opened his mouth, searching for explanation, apology, anything, but nothing came out. For the first time in Daniel's life, his father looked completely lost. Silence stretched painfully. Finally, Daniel shook his head and turned toward the door. "Don't lie to her," he said before leaving. Michael remained standing long after Daniel disappeared. Guilt crashed over him fully for the first time. The separation he maintained between family and secret life had collapsed instantly. Claire spoke gently. "Your son." Michael nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I know." He sat down heavily, realizing consequences were no longer distant possibilities. They were already here. "My family," he whispered. Claire watched him carefully, understanding something important had changed. "You should go home," she said. Michael hesitated, then nodded. For the first time since meeting her, leaving Claire felt necessary rather than difficult. That night, Michael sat in his car outside his house long after sunset. Lights glowed inside. Through the window, he could see Laura moving around the kitchen, completely unaware of what was coming. Daniel's shadow passed upstairs. Michael gripped the steering wheel tightly. He had convinced himself he could manage both worlds without harm. Now he saw clearly how wrong he had been. He wasn't just risking his marriage. He was losing his son's respect, and perhaps the family he loved most, he whispered to himself, unsure whether he was asking forgiveness or courage. Then he stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door, knowing nothing in his life would ever feel simple again. The hardest truth still waited to be spoken, and once spoken, it would change all of them forever. Michael Harper sat alone at the kitchen table, the dim light from the lamp above casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the rain had turned steady. drumming against the windows in a rhythm that made his thoughts feel heavier, more insistent. He stared at the coffee cup before him, untouched and cooling, as if waiting for him to find answers it could not give. Upstairs, Daniel's bedroom light flickered occasionally. He wasn't asleep, Michael knew that. He hadn't been sleeping properly since the cafe incident. For days, the tension in the house had been suffocating. Michael had tried to act normal, to maintain the routines that defined his life. He made breakfast, he did the laundry. He smiled at Laura over the table, but every action felt hollow, every gesture fragile. The secret he carried on, the pain it had caused, was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just guilt. It was fear, shame, and the heartbreaking realization that one mistake could threaten everything he had worked so hard to protect. Daniel had kept his distance, giving his father a cold civility, his eyes sharp, his voice measured. That distance, cut deeper than anger or disappointment, it was judgment, silent but relentless. Michael knew he could not avoid the conversation any longer. He had to confront the truth, face the consequences, and hope that somehow, some way, his family could survive it. When Daniel finally approached the kitchen, hesitance clear in his every step, Michael didn't look up immediately. The young man's arms were crossed, his shoulders stiff, as if bracing for impact. Daniel's voice broke the silence first. "You going to tell Mom?" he asked, the words clipped, but trembling slightly. Michael rubbed his face slowly, feeling the weight of the world in his hands. "I never meant for this to happen," he said quietly, but the words seemed inadequate, hollow even. "I didn't plan to hurt anyone." "That's not an answer," Daniel shot back, frustration seeping into his tone. Michael finally looked up, meeting his son's gaze. His eyes were tired, lined with the burden of guilt. "I felt forgotten," he admitted, each word deliberate, heavy with regret. "Not by you, never by you. But somewhere along the way, your mom and I stopped being partners. We became roommates. We stopped seeing each other fully." Daniel's anger wavered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of understanding, though it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. "You could have talked to her," he said, voice quieter now, edged with sadness. "I tried," Michael said softly. "And then I stopped trying. And that was my biggest mistake." The silence that followed was unbearable. It wasn't filled with words, but with weight, with consequences too heavy to carry alone. Daniel could feel the honesty in his father's confession. It hurt more than any lie ever could. The next evening, Michael mustered the courage to speak. To Laura, he asked her to sit with him in the living room. Daniel, respecting the gravity of the moment, stayed upstairs, listening without moving. Every sound from below tightening the pit in his stomach. Laura sat on the couch, her hands folded, neatly on her lap. "You're scaring me," she said softly. Noticing the tension in Michael's posture, he took a deep breath, words choking slightly on his tongue. "There's something I need to tell you," he began. Laura's initial response was a nervous smile, but when the truth left his lips, the expression vanished. "I met someone," he said, voice low but firm. The silence that followed was devastating. Laura's eyes widened slightly, searching his face for any hint of a joke, a misunderstanding, anything that would allow her to dismiss the confession. But the look in Michael's eyes was one of resignation, of undeniable honesty. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "A few months," he admitted, swallowing hard. Laura's chest rose and fell unevenly. "Did you love her?" Michael hesitated, and the hesitation alone answered her question. Her lips pressed together, and she closed her eyes. Pain settled over her like a heavy blanket. Not loud, not dramatic, but sharp and consuming. "I thought we were just tired," she whispered. "I didn't know we were broken." Upstairs, Daniel heard his mother's quiet sobs, his own emotions, threatened to spill over, anger, betrayal, confusion. Yet when he descended the stairs instinctively, his father stopped him halfway, stepping into the dim light of the hallway. "Stay calm," son Michael said, his
जाके
voice low and
brightness
controlled.
तेज कर
But even he sounded uncertain. "How can you say that?" Daniel snapped. "You did this. You broke everything." Laura, through tears, reached out. "Daniel, please," she whispered, and the plea stopped him. For the first time, he saw not just betrayal, but two people who had been quietly hurting. Long before this moment,
मेरी
weeks
तो माँ
passed in a
के
blur of tension
brightness
and
लो
fragile
होगी
reconciliation. Michael ended things with Claire Bennett, not out of obligation, but out of commitment to the family he had nearly lost. Claire understood the situation before. He even explained fully. "You still love your family," she said softly. "I never stopped," he admitted. Their goodbye was gentle, quiet, filled with mutual respect and understanding. Laura and Michael began counseling sessions together. Not because forgiveness came easily, but because their 22 years of shared life deserved an honest attempt. Some days were filled with arguments, heated and sharp. Other days were silent, heavy with reflection and unspoken regret. And on rare occasions, there were moments of laughter, fragile and unexpected, reminding them both of the
एंड से
life they had
जाके
once shared.
brightness तेज
Daniel
कर
observed everything carefully. He learned that relationships were complex, fragile, and often painful. Mistakes did not erase love, but they tested its endurance. He realized adulthood was not about perfect choices, it was about facing consequences with honesty and courage. His father had fallen, his mother had been hurt. Their family had
मेरी तो
teetered on the
माँ
edge of
के
collapse. Yet
brightness
through
लो
truth and
होगी
persistent, the three of them sat together on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. Laura leaned back in her chair, a cup of tea in her hands. Michael handed her a second cup without thinking. Their fingers brushed and neither pulled away. It was not a full restoration of love, not yet. But it was a start of fragile hope. Daniel looked at his father and Michael's eyes met his. "I failed you," he said softly, regret heavy in his tone. "You made a mistake." "Big difference, Daniel," replied a small, tentative smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you for not giving up on me," Michael whispered, emotion catching in his throat. "Someone had to keep this family together." Daniel said, shrugging lightly,
एंड
though
से
his heart
जाके
felt heavy with
brightness
relief and
तेज
lingering
कर
sadness. Laura laughed softly through tears, the sound light and unburdened. For the first time in months, it felt real, a sign that healing was possible even
अकेला
after
इधर
such
पे
deep betrayal. Later that night, as Daniel reflected on the events, he understood something vital. Love does not vanish when people fail. It may
मेरी
fracture,
तो माँ
waver, or
के
even disappear
brightness लो
temporarily,
होगी
but it has a remarkable capacity for endurance. Michael and Laura's journey back to one another was not perfect, not without struggle, but it was grounded in truth, in shared vulnerability, and in the commitment to face life's storms together as Michael turned off the porch light and watched his family through the window. He realized that staying, choosing honesty, by confronting the consequences had brought them to a place they could not have reached otherwise. They were not unbroken, but they were present, together. And in that presence, there was hope. Love, he understood, does not end with mistakes. Sometimes it begins anew in the moment people choose to stay to, face pain, and to rebuild what has been broken.
एंड
And
से
in that
जाके
choice, there is a
brightness
quiet,
तेज कर
enduring beauty that even betrayal cannot erase. The rain outside slowed to a gentle drizzle. And inside the house, the Harper family slept fitfully, but with a sense of fragile peace.
अकेला इधर पे
They had survived the storm, and though scars remained, the foundation for a new chapter was firmly in place. They would move forward together, imperfectly, honestly,
मेरी
and with
तो
the
माँ
knowledge
के
that love at its
brightness लो
deepest is
होगी
resilient.